All right, ladies and gentlemen, come and have a seat down the front, because it's kind of weird just speaking to two people in the corner and three of you at the back.
One, two.
Come down, guys. Come and join us. Come and hang out. At least give us the impression that we have some kind of an audience. That's cool. Thanks very much. If you nab the ones in the front row, there's also, like, you can stretch your legs out and everything, yeah?
It's like the bulkhead seat on a plane.
Yes. That's it, with a strange screen and a baby changing facility in front of you. Yeah, you get, look, see, they're free. You got a free upgrade.
Can I just say that in all my years as a performing musician, whenever I said, hey, everyone, come to the front, you wouldn't get this, so thank you.
Yeah, I think the best one I saw like that was Delamitri, and they playing a small venue, and they just basically, the singer said, I'll get a pint to the first person who gets up and dances, and it was mainly students. And
wow.
He had to get, I think he had to get about 15 pints or something. But
I was at a club gig in Glasgow, and I found out that they had this thing called the Malt of the Month, and it was a 2-pound shot of what in New York would have been a $20 whiskey. So I announced this from the stage before my gig started. I was getting set up, and I looked down, and my entire monitor was just shots of malt. So I said, all right, game on, let's do one per song. Don't remember the end of the night at all, but I think it went well. I wasn't arrested.
That's a result. When you have to do a lot to get arrested in Glasgow.
That's true.
So, welcome. We've Benji and I have kind of had a chat about what to talk about in this session, and as it's quite an intimate audience, we felt we'd maybe involve you a bit in this as well. So you get to shape the direction of the conversation. So how many of you are familiar with Benji's work? Any of you know about Pledge? What about any of you are at the blockchain discussion chat? Okay. And what about his music? Okay. Any of you been at Glasgow? Right. Okay. That's more people have been at Glasgow than heard you as a musician, which is a shame. I was hoping maybe someone would have said, I bought you that whiskey for the third song. Do you want to give us a quick sort of potted history of yourself, sure. Benji? That's maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah. So first off, thanks for having me. Thank you. I'm the son of 3 managers. My mother, my father, my stepfather all managed, and so most of my life has been on a tour bus or on the road. And when I was about 13, I got the bug to play in bands, and basically self-released my own CDs, had my own record label, kind of did that through the 90s. I don't remember much of the 90s. I remember having a lot of fun, but it was pretty fast-paced in rock bands in London, LA, New York, Boston. I went to Berklee College of Music, met my co-founder of PledgeMusic there, and then about 10 years ago, I founded PledgeMusic as a direct-to-fan crowdfunding platform. That was my first kind of shot at technology. Really got bit by that bug hard. I joined the board of the Future of Music Coalition, and I joined the academic advisory board of SAE Institute in the States, and then basically began blockchain work about 4 years ago. At the same time, I started a small fund to invest in startups, and I joined the advisory board of 14 or so different startups. So my day job is really, really intense, spread between a lot of different things. But I also was able to consult for a major streaming service, a major content creation service, a podcasting company, and now a radio service. So I've been able to see through a very wide lens every point of how the sausage is made. And the current kind of thrust of thinking is really around transformational artificial intelligence plays. Blockchains, I think, are just a necessary part of the future. And then more fundamentally, how the artist and fan are going to connect going forward. So those are the thrusts of what's been going on.
So at which point did you stop doing music, or at which point did you gravitate away from music and into technology? Was it an overnight thing where you're like, man, I've had enough of that, I'm going to get into technology, or was it a gradual process?
Yeah. I had this thought that I could build a tech company and be a musician at the same time. A few of us have tried this, and if you thought making music was hard, like navigating Series A funding rounds or doing it's brutal bare knuckle stuff. In particular, when you come into the music industry, which is, I think it was Stan Corrin who said, when it comes to technology, the music industry has historically finished just ahead of the Amish. And so when you try and bring something new into this, it often meets with immense amount of resistance. So I was playing music and doing a startup. And I remember the point, my last show, I was doing email, picked up my guitar, played, came off stage, and rather than go party, had to sit down and do more email. And that was the point where it diverged. So I'd say that was about 9 years ago. I still have a hankering for it, but I still experiment with releasing records in different ways. And now the big thing is I can probably, there's an AI that I've been advising, and I can basically make music with the push of a single button, which I think is awesome. So maybe I'll get back into music now, and I'll give you the Spotify URL, and you can pay me tens of cents.
So was that were there things from your music background that really helped inform or equip you for doing these funding rounds, for doing these technology meetings?
Fuck no. One of the funny things about it was my co-founder in my current company, he hit me up and he said, "Why don't you just use an Excel spreadsheet like everybody else?" And I said, "I don't know how they work." He's like, "What do you mean?" I said, I just don't know I don't know how to make it do what you make it do. And he's like, "But it's easy." And I said, no, I could tell you how to rewire your amp, right? I could tell you how to get this kind of sound in a studio, or what a Neve compressor is going to sound like. Excel, I didn't open my first one till I was 34 years old. It was one of the worst things I've ever done. And I try and keep them closed and move to some kind of cloud-based system, anything that. One thing that being a musician that was not signed to a major had me do was remain scrappy and entrepreneurial. And I found that in musicians, there's an innate ability to understand certain technologies. GarageBand seems like it's really simple to most musicians. It's actually really hard to get your head around if you don't know how it works. But the barriers to entry coming down and the technology becoming more ubiquitous means we're going to see thousands, millions more musicians in the future. And so you have to be entrepreneurial as a musician, I believe, unless you're going to hand over your existence to a manager, to a label, to a publisher. And I found that when that happens, you're going into a very formulaic type of system, which will not resonate in the world in which we're going into. And so did it prepare me? Not for the funding side of things. Like trying to get a record deal. I remember like sitting with the heads of major labels going, "I would have cut my arm off to get you my tape, CD, whatever it was at the time." And now we're negotiating over points on a deal in direct-to-fan space. So it was, I guess, somewhat of a preparation. But the other thing is being a musician is really hard. Being a startup founder is really hard. They both kind of suck. But the theory is you live like no one would want to live, so that you get to live like very few people get to live later on. That's the trade-off. But so I knew technology was going to be part of it.
Very few people live now then.
I have a pretty blessed life in general, yeah. I don't have to open up Microsoft Excel if I don't want to. I don't have to, there are certain trade-offs, but I think also just one thing that occurred. When I first saw MySpace, my brain exploded. And I wrote to all of my bandmates at the time, and I said, "This is what radio will look like. Everyone sign up for an account. You can send 399 messages a day. You can add 299 posts." And I got a script that did all of that automatically for us. So all of a sudden, we were actually making iTunes sales when iTunes came off out of MySpace. And then a really pivotal thing happened. I was like, if I can do that, a Universal A&R guy called up and was like, hey, see your band's popping on MySpace. You got 4.5 million plays. And I was like, yeah, there'll be 6 million tomorrow. He's like, how do you know? And I said, I have a machine that makes it work. And he goes, oh. I was like, wait, I just fucked myself there, didn't I? Hang on. But what it led me to believe is that like that was what the future of it was going to look like. And MySpace, towards its death, put music players in and was beginning that side of things. But what they did was they turned me off. And that was when I went, I will never again tell musicians to build their house on someone else's land. Because if a service like MySpace could cut me off from 150,000 of my listeners, friends, quote unquote, right, then I don't own that space. And when it happened, it was basically just, they said, oh, rule change, now you can no longer email your friends on MySpace. Now, Facebook has a similar limit, right? And that was what it taught me, it taught me that I had to be entrepreneurial about creating a fan base. So in one sense, what the destruction of MySpace did was make me go hardcore into email and SMS as my primary means of communicating with fans. That led to the creation of Pledge, which was the pre-orders based on email, SMS. So the future rails that I think music commerce is going to roll upon, there'll be winners and losers, but email, SMS are one. Or you can try and build your house on Spotify's land or YouTube's land or Google's land, but the inevitable result is they start to charge rent, and the rent gets really expensive, and then they own your users.
What about them using them to direct people towards what you do, or certain services being used then as a signpost for somewhere else? So you have a presence in those areas, but you're really using that to direct people to your own plot.
It's a great point. When we were at Pledge, I learned something amazing. Pledge did, just for reference, direct-to-fan pre-orders, really long lead, and what we discovered was artists were more interesting when they were making things than when they were selling them. So the average pledger spent $55 per transaction to buy signed vinyl, test pressing, poster, etc. But what they were actually buying was access to content, which was only available on the Pledge platform. So the end result was the same, music on streaming service. But what we found was that these large artists would come to us and say, we can't reach our fans through Facebook or Instagram unless we pay to reach our fans. Why is that? And I said, because that's their business model. Their business model is to sell you ads to reach your own users. My stepfather manages a really massive band with like 45 million followers.
Who does he manage?
Genesis, Phil Collins, Pink Floyd. One of Pink Floyd. And what was wild was, he said, why can't we reach all the fans? And I said, well, you can. You just have to pay Facebook to reach them. And he's like, why? I said, because that's their business model. It's a bit like that moment where you're like, well, sir, we sell ads, right? So because in a Facebook or even a Spotify now, which is going to start to charge for the artist services portion of its thing, SoundCloud charges that, you're basically, to build a two-sided marketplace, you have to figure out you're charging both. And so if you're an artist building on these properties, what you've got to do is measure. If I spend $100 promoting to Instagram, or euros, how much revenue does that give me back if I send them to Spotify? If I send 100 euros on YouTube, how much revenue does that give me back? And you have to have intention. So in my mind, the goal of every artist on the face of the planet should be to use social media and use streaming services with the sole target of getting people onto an email or an SMS or a POP, a personally owned platform like an app. Because you need to control, as artists or managers of artists, the flow of information between your fans. Anyone in the middle of that represents a threat to your business long term because they are not aligned with you. And we said this earlier, there has never been, I don't think, devised a worse method of monetization for artists and songwriters than streaming. It is a terrible way to make money because of the size and scale you need to reach to make manageable volumes of revenue. I think it's like 250 million streams gets you $1 million. It's a hard number, right?
I'm going to ask you something here because I think that, okay, this is for the artists, but if we're looking at the wider economy of making money from music, in the old model, artists thought they were doing all right because a big record company, in some instances, would write them a check for an advance. The record company would then decide on, a promotional campaign. They'd spend a ton of cash if the artist was lucky on making a video, which they could then take out of the royalties. The Beatles, infamously, I think it was a 1% royalty that they split on their sales. And when at some point someone at EMI suggested that they should, because they'd done so well, they should maybe double that to 2%, they were kind of ridiculed. Why would we do that? Even when it got to the latter stages where you're talking about 14% royalty on the dealer price, so that's what a CD was sold to a record shop for, we're still not talking that much money. So, I mean, really, most artists never recouped. If money did come in, they would, it would take quite a lot of time to pay that off. So, I mean, in the economy, is it really that different, is my question to you?
It's different because the options today are different. There was not a device that you could hold in your hand that could communicate with all of your fans. I'm an investor, so full disclosure, and an advisor to Ryan Leslie's app, Superphone. Superphone is like a Salesforce MailChimp for your SMS. And the reason I got involved was because I watched this rapper that very few people had heard of and producer generate $2 million per album cycle from 15,000 fans using SMS. But the majority of the revenue, so I think it was like a few percent came from the recorded side. So if you look at Ryan on socials, all his calls to action are text me. Here's my phone number, text me, let's chat. Every day, because he's got so many fans now, he calls 4 or 5 fans on their birthdays. So he's flying around on a private jet. And people say to him, hey, you should really consider getting into a Spotify playlist. And he says, why? What would that do for me? Well, it would get you exposure. For what? What's the goal? He says, I like making $2 million a year. So if I send people to Spotify, they can't spend money on me. They can spend money on Spotify, but not me. This is not for everybody. Now, his tracks are on the platform. They're on Google, they're on YouTube. He uses the platforms. But to him, he just tests and measures what works. And what worked for him was his fans like to text. So rather than say, no, please go to Spotify and pay them, he says, well, here's a track. And so just one little thing. So when he comes to town, he texts his followers, geolocated, and says, hey, I'm doing a show. Who wants to come? It's $35. They pay him directly. He books the show and plays the show. So now he came from a major label, so he's seen that economic volume work before. So what I'm saying is if he controls, from 15,000 fans, and his total fan base is something like 110,000, something around there, if he can make $2 million from 15,000 fans, isn't that easier than trying to get 250 million streams or 500 million streams to equal the same amount of money? Because that's much harder. Getting to millions of people is hard, but hardcore local targeting on your fan base, the ones that want to be there, is much, much easier, I believe.
I'm going to flip this, right? First of all, I'm going to say that, there's always going to be different business models. Yep. So the Grateful Dead were quite happy for people to bootleg their recordings because they were going out and playing live. So the bootlegging just didn't really, and this is the 60s, they weren't even that bothered because they were doing fine out of live. And there's countless examples of that sort of thing in smaller territories. I mean, in Mexico, one of the most famous Mexican rock bands, is rumored to have actually, one of the band members sold the master to pirates because they could make more money from the people that were putting out the pirate CDs from their own record company, because the deal wasn't that good. So, but I'm going to fast forward. We showcased a band at my Y Days event in 2017 called Vistas. Those guys didn't Google the name either, but they're doing all right. Now, what's interesting with them is they could maybe pull 150 people in their own city.
Yep.
The last time I worked out roughly what they'd made on Spotify streams, and this is probably about 5 or 6 months ago, it was about £20,000, which, you know, if the Brexit nonsense carries on as it is, will be about 20,000 euros at the end of next week, right? But the point here is that for them to have made that revenue as an unknown act and go out and tour and sell merch, you know, all the touring costs, all the merch production costs, all the, you know, CD pressing, if they were going to do that, would have been a really tall order. And I think that, you know, I understand that they were lucky enough that there was a guy at Spotify who was into them and had just picked up on them and just thought, right, I'm going to keep putting them on playlists. But also, the reality is that they found people who wanted to listen to them, because the equivalent playlist with other acts would probably have yielded them, you know, far fewer streams.
But the key is, it's not that you don't do that. It's that it's not your only strategy. If you think about, I like to think of an artist as a spotlight going outwards. So the spotlight basically says, if I fire my spotlight and all my promotional boom at Spotify, what does it return to me? So the answer in this case is 20 grand.
They didn't do any promotion. They were just put on it.
But so when they message the fans on social media, where do they send them? Listen to our new thing on. We just got added to this playlist on. Boom. So all those fans are being sent to something that the band does not own. Eck and the public markets now own it, right? It's a good thing. One alternative would have been, they could have said, hey, text us here and we'll send you a copy of tonight's show. Or, hey, come into our app and you can subscribe to a feed of a live set we're going to do on the way home from the show tonight, right, in the van. All these things become possible, but the key is all the people watching them there are the moment. If you send those people to Spotify, your spotlight goes to Spotify. Spotify's doing great. The band needs more money. Spotify's doing good. And in my mind, what it is so, and I said this jokingly, and apparently you can't do it, but if I were going to release a new album today, I would make my album artwork a QR code with my phone number underneath it. So that when it lands in Spotify, people say, I wonder what that is. And they'd hold their phone up, right? And they go, a bonus track. Now, some friends of mine tried this, and Spotify not only didn't allow it, but blocked their account. So hopefully more to be learned on that. Why? Why is that a sensitive thing? And the answer is because Spotify's in the business of monetizing fan data and monetizing the media files. But artists need to be in that same attention space. EscapeX is a platform that I've been on the board of for quite a while now. And in EscapeX, there are artists and influencers mostly making $30,000, $40,000 a month in commenting revenue from fans. So fans will literally comment, and they will offer subscriptions in this app. But what it does is, more than anything, is allows these fans to get push notifications when things go live. So if you're in Spotify, which is, again, a great platform, I'm not bashing Spotify here, Spotify can push notify your fans of new things should it choose to. The guy at Spotify, you know, the ring didn't need to be kissed, but he basically blessed the band, and there you go, we allow you to be popular now. And they can turn that off. That's the other thing, right? Because you're giving your power over to a platform. And remember, the platform's goals are not necessarily aligned with the goals of the artist. Very much with the labels, but not so much with the artists, because the labels have different types of deals. So I think that what we got to look at is, in my mind, the perfect artist-to-fan connection is SMS, email, and push. And if you're sending people to things that don't achieve that for you, then you have to ask yourself, what is the return on my attention? I call it return on attention economy. And I think that the biggest thing I've seen is someone will come to me and say, hey, let's check out my song on SoundCloud. And I'll say, why? Well, you might like it. Yeah, but then what would I do with it? Share it with people. Okay, but then how does that benefit you? And just one little anecdote here. There was an amazing artist I found. She approached me and said, hey, will you work with me? And I said, no, I don't have time. But I gave her this strategy. And she said, Benji, with all due respect, you're geriatric. You're 100 years old. You don't know how this works today. And I said, okay. She says, what I want to do is I want to get the top bloggers to hit me on Hype Machine. Then I'm going to go on SoundCloud and I'm going to get 1 million plays. And I said, okay. And then what? And she said, then I'm going to release a video. I said, okay, great. So she goes out, she finds the blogging service, she does the thing, she boosts the plays, she gets it all done, she gets 1.2 million plays on SoundCloud. And she calls me up and she's like, see, told you this is how it's done. And I said to her, great, how much money did you make? She said, none. I said, okay. So why don't you message all those SoundCloud listeners and tell them about your video that's coming out? She's like, how do I do that? I said, there's your problem. So she wanted to achieve attention, but she wasn't measuring what came back from that attention. 1 million listeners on SoundCloud is 1 million SoundCloud listeners. That's a great thing to have achieved, but what you tell them to do, where you lead them is the key. And I think in this future, there's going to be an entire other economy that's outside of the charts, that's outside of the streaming services, that will be doing way better because it will focus on an achievable goal. I think you could take your band and say, listen, we need to gather the 15,000 hardcore fans of this band and super serve them. And all I'm going to do as a manager is make sure that they're happy, make sure they get first in line at the shows, make sure they get the music first, on and on and on. If you just did that, and those fans pay you £100, €100 a year, you've won that game. What's easier, that or hoping you get picked by one of the many people who has everyone else trying to pick to them?
How do you achieve that mass, though? I mean, this idea of 15,000, that's a lot.
I agree.
It's like, how do you get to that 15,000 then? Where do you find those 15,000 people that are going to give you that money?
Yep.
Without using a platform?
No, I'm with you. But this is it. You are the platform. You have to think of yourself when you're an artist as a platform. And you test the networks and measure what comes back. So in Instagram, you can have an email sign-up form at the top. Very few people do. But that SMS or that email, and you should say in your Instagram text, like, hey, text me up here. And when they text you, text them back saying, hey, thanks. What's your phone number? What's your date of birth? I want to send you something on your birthday. And every birthday that pops up, we got this idea, I don't know where it came from, that we have to reach everybody. Spotify's job is to reach everybody. It won't work otherwise. YouTube, same way. Our job is not to do that. Our job is to reach those that care. And so when your band played the first 150, that's who starts it. And those 150 people being able to share something proprietary, share something that was just for them, or say, don't share this. Keep this to yourselves, more to come. That's an easier path. And I believe what it is we've people want to share what they love. They get addicted by it. If the link that they share sends them to a platform that is not aligned with the artist's data intentions, we'll call them, right? Then you're basically sending them to somebody else. And I think that that's going to be something that we have to reconsider as artists and people who work with artists, because my goal is the first 100 fans, then the first 200 fans, and the first 1,000. Just an anecdotal thing. When iTunes first came out, I remember sitting there saying, I don't have to carry CDs around anymore. And if I go through an independent distributor like CD Baby, I can get $6.30 for every record I sell. Holy shit. And you know how I identify people who are on iTunes? They have white earphones. So if I just give them something that gets them to my iTunes page, I make money. It worked. I made more money that year from hacking MySpace and putting iTunes in than I did from CD revenue. But now we're in a digital space, it's a different economy. And what I've found is like on platforms like EscapeX or others, the influencers have got this down. The influencers know what to post on YouTube, what ads to run, on and on. As artists and artist representatives, we have to think in these terms. But
when you say influencers, what do you mean? Because when I think of influencers, it's usually some sort of like, you know, I don't know, someone that's going around the world sort of doing something about food, or, you know, quite often like someone who looks like a sort of dressed porn star. And, you know, I say that quite seriously, like, and the, you know, it's like, well, all right, you showed me one earlier on, and I actually asked if she made music or whether this was, you know, this was just like kind of sad blokes, like, you know, paying $50 to have their text pushed up, you know, like those. So, I mean, what is it? Are these musical influencers? Are these people that are actually making something really creative, or is it something more that their key thing is that they've got a lot of followers?
Yeah. I think what it is there's all artists are influencers in some way. I'm very fond of this thought. It's kind of sad, but most humans don't do what they want to do with their lives. And so they look up to artists or people who change the game. And so we would watch super fans at Pledge like share and tweet and talk about stuff that the band had not released. It was just footage of them in the studio, right? And so what it is we figured out that you could harvest human attention and sell a product at the same time. That sounds very callous, right? Harvesting human attention. But guess what? That's what Netflix does. That's what Hulu does. That's what Facebook does. That's what Spotify does. They harvest the human attention of a fan. And so if I'm a great guitarist, I have multiple options. I can do lessons. I can become a teacher. I can share on Facebook this great thing that I've done. But what does that get me? Whereas if you do it on a personally owned platform, whatever that is, it can be your own app that you can code, it can be something else, you're bringing them into your world in which you control push, but mostly you won't get thrown off the platform if you decide to do something chancy. So 99% of artists and managers are groaning right now saying, oh God, just get with the program, put it up on Spotify, try and find the playlist, do all the things that we do. You know, Benj, all albums are released on Fridays. Get with the program. Like, it's insanity. But so what I'm saying is the artists that try this will win the game. Will we necessarily see that they've won the game? No. But in the future, we will look at massive stages and conferences and festivals full of artists we've never fucking heard of, who engage with their fan base in such a way. The platforms of the future are the ones that will facilitate that. In other words, the artists and their content is the interface.
Right. Let's go back to this, because you mentioned this this platform, the artist control platform. So, you know, what you just described there, I mean, that actually happened where, you know, artists that hadn't got mainstream sort of media, you know, view or attention rather, were getting booked for big festivals because they'd had like an incredible response in the earlier days of streaming services. So, you know, that thing of like someone just appearing where people, you know, even when Scooter went to #2 in the UK charts, because the charts were very much observed from a London perspective, it came out of nowhere because they'd played sort of horrible raves in Scotland and Northern Ireland, where the record label had really concentrated their marketing efforts, because London, you know, was regarded as a bit more sophisticated. But my point is that, you know, moving back to the current time or the present, how do you create the platform? What's, you know, you say, oh, well, just set yourself up with a, you know, an app, or get a, you know, do something like that. If the holy grail is to have your own artist-owned platform, what's your suggestion? Where should people go to do that?
Well, I think you need to look. There are multiple platforms out there that do this, but you can also look at platforms who are aligned with the artist in general. So at Pledge, just to give you some.
No. Can I just interrupt you? How do you make the platform? Because this is I think the crux of the matter.
No, I'm getting to that. You either build your own. You use a service like an EscapeX, or there's a couple of others out there that I don't honestly know the names of, but EscapeX is the one that I know because I'm watching it from an internal level. And you should basically test them all. You should test every platform and see what works for you. In the same way that you should test which social network works for you as well, if Snap takes off or whatever it is. But be agnostic to it. Only look at the result. And in my mind, what it is if you want to use a large platform, you have to look at it and ask the question, what happens to my data? So at Pledge, my last company, the reason that I was okay with us being a centrally controlled platform was that we built a button that said at any time you can export all of your fan information, email address, phone number, etc., from the platform. So if Pledge died, your data's safe, because your data is your digital gold. It's the one thing that you have to have. Now, so when you look at the next platform, you should sit there and say, what is the data exchange that we're supposed to have here? Pledge is one that was built that was on. Noise Trade was another one that we actually acquired at Pledge, which was basically stream the song in exchange for an email address. So 24 hours before it went live, give an email address, and you're in. But look for the platforms that align with you so that if they died, you could have all of your data. So if Spotify died, what happens to all of your fans' data? How do you get them?
That's not an artist-owned platform, though, is it, Benji? It's owned by someone else. And what if they decide then, you know what, we allowed you to have your data, but now we're not allowing you to have the data anymore? And I think this is where, I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but I think that this is what happened with quite a few of those services. Initially, you're allowed to do this, but then suddenly you're not. So, if you're talking about a platform, the platform's one thing. They can, in a lot of respects, you are honorable with what you did with Pledge, but you could have been a bastard as well and just decided, right, okay, you're not going to have that data anymore, or if you do, you have to subscribe to the premium tier of Pledge or pay me every month. So really, we're talking about the same thing. So if an artist truly wants to control that platform, I guess they have to build it from scratch themselves, right?
They either do, but I think, but again,
and then how do they do that?
No, I'll tell you. The answer is that the building blocks to build platforms is going to become a lot easier. If you look at Squarespace is a really great example of this. I use EscapeX as an example because the only barrier is the App Store, right? The App Store, Android or Apple, are going to be your challenges no matter what, because again, that's the problem with closed systems. If you decide to put nudity on your own space, is that your right to be able to do so? You also have to watch out for hate speech, beheadings, all the horrible things that can occur. So the answer is build your own, or find companies that allow you instant export as part of their terms of service. And so Bandzoogle is a great example of a website building platform. It gives you email, all the tools that you want, but you can export every day your email addresses. When you sign up for Squarespace, everyone that signs up sends you an email into your inbox. So you can literally store all of those as hard copies. The reason I say this is important. Blockchain companies are trying to build these right now. Really hard to do in blockchain. But the reality of it is that I don't want to just say one platform, because it's the only one I know that's doing this right. But EscapeX is allowing you to facilitate this transaction, because everyone that signs up, you get to keep as your own. If the platform doesn't allow you to keep your data or charges you to reach your fans, that's when you should start to become concerned. Because if their business model begins to have trouble, everything goes wrong from that point on. I actually basically said, there was never, luckily we never got there, but I was ready to have the conversation where if my board at Pledge had ever said, hey, by the way, we think we should charge to access their data, I'm like, well, that's me resigning then, I'm out. And I would have forced through an email that basically said, your data's going to be, you're not safe, go, go, go. Or we would have just automatically sent data to everybody. But this is a digital lifeline. And I remember when artists first started to come to work at Pledge, they would have their email addresses from the label, and quite often the label would spam other bands with the same email lists, and the open rates were zero. Maintaining databases is hard, but you can do this with MailChimp, you can do this with Superphone, EscapeX, and other app building platforms. Just look for the ones that give you the data, or be entrepreneurial and build your own, and build one that everyone else can use. And decentralization and blockchains will help for this later, but for now, use what's there.
And so in what respect will blockchain help us? How does blockchain work that can you sum it up quickly for anyone that missed your talk earlier on? How would that work in terms of facilitating this?
So in theory, you're subject to the way that the web is accessed on a phone. If you want to use an app, Apple has to approve it. And Apple can say no for 1,000 reasons. Android can say no. So one of the things that could occur is you could create a decentralized application on a blockchain-based platform, in theory, that no one could say no to. You could post whatever you wanted. Because blockchains are not controlled by any single person, they're controlled by the whole network, by what's called a protocol. So with Bitcoin, the Chinese government may decide to ban Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean that they can actually stop the network, because there's 19, 20,000 nodes running this massive system. You'd have to shut all of them down at once. Well, actually, 2 of them is the minimum you need to make it live. So you'd have to shut down all of them at once, but you don't know where they are, you don't know who's running them, et cetera. So the decentralized application matters. No one's cracked this yet because authority is very hard, but right now the closest would be the Steam platform, which is an autonomous blogging platform. So you can put up your stuff and make money off of it, and no one can shut it down. If you say, delete that, there's no kind of off button. Now, as I said earlier, that's very scary too, because if I decide to put up a revenge porn to the music of Michael Bublé, and no one can stop me, then that's a problem. So we need to think both positives and the negatives. But
I just thought you actually meant revenge porn with Michael Bublé in it. Yeah.
Can't get that out of your head, can you?
No.
Enduring image.
Yes, really.
Powerful.
Sorry, I interrupted you. So that's
Michael Bublé.
Yeah.
On the blockchain.
No, that's it. It's stopped, isn't it? It's in there. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you got those. That then is something where you essentially have that ownership.
Yeah.
How you then convert that into, I suppose, developing, providing a platform for your art, your creativity. Yeah. How does that work?
So I think what's going to happen is there are going to be hundreds of companies going into this space, and that's a good thing, because ultimately what I think the companies will realize is, if you look at Facebook, the network, or you look at YouTube influencers, their content, what they create, powers the network, and yet they receive fractions of the money. So if you invert that and you suddenly say, well, why don't the creators power the network? And they run it and have fair shakes. I was always surprised by this. I'm not signed to a major label. And Frank Ocean, I don't believe, is not signed to a major label, or Chance the Rapper. And yet his payment out of streaming services was negotiated by major labels and by a body of independents. But why? And one of the reasons that we're building the dotBlockchain project is, what if he created a song, and within the song was a bit of code that said, hey, it's a penny per stream for the first 24 hours, or free in exchange for an email address. If you want it to have it in Spotify, help yourself. It's available. All the data's correct. If you don't, that's absolutely fine. But what I think we're going to see is this jump whereby the artist and the interface and the media become one. Songs will become clever. You can add code and intelligence to songs and software on top of them. Because the big revelation I had when I started dotBlockchain was this. Today, a song is a media file, right, in a 27-year-old file format called a WAV. It's a publishing file in a file format called a CWR, right, which has various codes attached to it, ISWC, et cetera. So it's a spreadsheet, basically. And then another spreadsheet on the other side for recordings. But they don't interact with each other. They're not harmonized. So that means that they're incredibly slow. It means that you have no idea if it is what it says on the box, because the box has no permanence to it. But what if you change that and you basically made the song the means by which you would communicate? If the song becomes code, you can put an interface on the song. So potentially speaking, you could send someone your network a URL, say, hey, check out the song here. In exchange for an email address, you get it for free. You own it. If you share it with someone, you get 5% of the sales. Why not? Trying to get that to scale is an interesting conundrum. But the key is, I want my song to get the fastest into an Alexa device so that people will say, hey, Alexa, play my song. And does Alexa care where it comes from? No. It has to know for the rights. But if we build songs and turn them into code, then you can build software that will basically enrich this. It's going forward here. But the key is this. If I go to Chance's site and commit commerce with him there, and he has my data and has all of my information, isn't that more of a win than me going and committing commerce with SoundCloud or somebody else for him in that instance, based on the payouts that could be possible if he chose to offer them?
I guess the obvious question to this is like, what if Amazon says, well, if you want to play this on your Alexa device, you have to give us 50% of any revenue?
Yep. And what the smart artist would do is say, thanks, but no thanks. And now, all the fans who say, Alexa, please play it, get upset. And they basically, and Amazon listens to all these upset fans, because it's listening to all your conversations, and it says, shit, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Let's just do the deal he said. Because remember, their job is to keep the customers happy. So Amazon's a very interesting scenario, but basically in my mind, if there's a data exchange and you build songs and you turn them into code and they can interact with the services at that level, they'll just make a deal. And the deal could be, it's free for anyone who is on Amazon Prime, or it's 50 cents for anyone who is not. But if you upgrade, you get it and boom, boom, boom for free. Because what does Amazon want? Same thing the artist wants. Customer data.
So Radiohead, AC/DC, the Beatles, all of Oasis, all of those acts that held out with Spotify ended up doing deals with Spotify.
Yep.
For the same low streaming rates. So does that not suggest that eventually, surely if you do hold those ace cards with something that customers are going to get pissed off if they can't hear you, but it didn't lead to any of those acts getting more favorable terms, did it?
I think it's also because we don't know what the deals were. I'm sure that there were different types of deals struck, but I think ultimately the Taylor Swift one was really interesting. So remember, Taylor Swift held out. Oh God, come on, get to the future, Taylor. And she's like, no, wait. Let me just sell 1.2 million physical products. Let me just sell 2-3 million digital downloads at full rate. Then I'll go into streaming for you. What's a better business decision? Making all of that money and getting all of that data, or not? Because she was going to go on streaming anyway. I'm not saying don't do both. What I'm saying is don't just do one. Because if you looked at the path to making more money for your act, allowing fans to spend $50 or 50 euros on you or not allowing them to do so just means you won't get their $50. Never saying don't be in Spotify, YouTube, etc. But basically pick your battles. I have this thing whereby this artist sent me their music, and I'm just like, okay, what do you want me to do? Listen to it, stream it, enjoy it. Okay, but to what effect? You've got 3 cents out of me, maybe, if this goes into one of my playlists long term. And I think that we just have to think about, like, the Ryan Leslies and the artists that are monetizing attention are going to be the winners longer term. We just have to give them the tools. And as artists or representative artists, just look for the platforms that are aligned with your long-term goals, as opposed to the long-term goals of shareholders or VCs.
Great. I think that's a fine note to end the chat on. Thanks very much, Benji. We're actually being turfed out of here. I think we overran by 5 minutes. So, but come and talk to us. Come and ask Benji some more stuff. And next year, come back and talk about artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, we got that one next. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.